Tell us about that photo. Is there a story behind it? What sort of equipment did you use? Welcome to Through the Lens of Faith, 135 years of Courier Photojournalism podcast, where we're getting the stories behind some of the photos that will be on display in a Catholic Courier photo exhibition this October. Now, here are your hosts, Gina Capilazzi and Rebecca LeClaire. Bonnie Trafelet was a staff photographer at the Courier Journal from 1987 to 1988.
And then after leaving the Catholic Courier, Bonnie moved to Chicago, and she worked as a photographer for the Northwest Herald, that's in Crystal Lake, Illinois, for 7 years. And then she was hired by the Daily Herald in Arlington Heights, Illinois.
After a year and a half at the Daily Herald, she got a call from the Chicago Tribune, where she worked from 1997 to 2009. She also worked for the Chicago News Cooperative and the Rotary International.
And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, a little bit of a career change, and she is now a paralegal in the Chicago area. She still does photography on the side and the fun stuff, right? Flowers, nature, friends, family, all that kind of stuff. Welcome, Bonnie. Let's talk about how you got your start in photography. What captured your eye first?
My mother was a huge influence on me as a child. She loved education, and she subscribed to the National Geographic and the original Life magazine. And I used to wait as a little kid every week for that Life magazine to come in the mail so I could see all the great pictures in there.
Yeah, famous people there for sure. And then how did you get to the Courier Journal, which is now called the Catholic Courier?
Yes. I was working in Lansing, Michigan as a freelance photographer for United Press International. And the bureau chief knew that they were going to shut down his bureau and that he was going to be laid off. So he said to me, you better look for a job before you have to compete with me for one. So that was back in the day before social media. And I believe that I probably saw an ad in like the National Press Photographer magazine. I'm not sure, but I answered an ad and sent in my portfolio to Karen Franz, and I got an interview. Drove out to Rochester, New York, and met with her. So
you moved here to come work for the Courier Journal, and Karen Franz is our general manager and editor, still here today. So what do you remember about your time at the Courier Journal? I know you were here in the 80s, so I'm making you go back quite a bit to remember things, but what were some of the assignments and some of the things that you did while you were here?
I covered most. I was the only staff photographer, so I tried to cover most of the assignments because I wanted them. Well, first of all, Rochester is just drop dead gorgeous, and so is the Finger Lakes area and all of upstate New York. So I really enjoyed my time there, and I enjoyed a lot of the assignments. I did everything from like high school sports, Catholic high school events to church events to parish events to the protests, all sorts of stuff. I really enjoyed learning a lot about Roman Catholicism that I just didn't know because I was raised Lutheran.
Well, let's talk about the sports. You mentioned that you got to cover a lot of sports, and in the exhibit, Lens Through Faith, that there's a DeSales baseball championship celebration. It was a shot that you took in 1988. Can you set the scene for us?
I'll try. I mean, they won the championship. I don't remember much about it, but that image is kind of iconic. I mean, you see that in that same similar image in professional sports, and the joy of winning a championship. It was great that, I'm sure those kids loved that picture. I wonder where they are now.
Yeah. Now, at that time, you were shooting with film, and you don't know that you got an image like that until you go back and you're able to process it. So what was your thoughts when you saw that image, maybe like, or,
I'm like, yes, nailed it. But yeah, then the other thing that I shot, that would have been on black and white film, but the other wonderful thing that I got to do back in the day was I got experience at the Courier shooting chrome, which helped me get my next job, and lighting. I remember going down into the Finger Lakes for Christmas. It was a Christmas pageant, so I had to photograph all the kids in the Christmas pageant, and I rented lights, and I had to shoot chrome, so using a light meter. And I remember I'm like, oh, this is in a church, and I'm like, you don't know where the electrical outlets are. You better buy some extension cords. So I bought two 50-foot extension cords. And I used them. That was absolutely perfect. I get to my next job when I'm at the Northwest Herald. We had to light a gymnasium, a college gymnasium, and they said again, well, we need extension cords. And I said, well, I have two 50-foot extension cords. This male photographer looks at me and goes, what woman has two 50-foot extension cords?
A smart one.
A smart one.
yes,
right.
Well, we're here to celebrate women photographers, especially those who worked for the Courier Journal. So let's talk about that. You didn't see as many women photographers back then, certainly not doing sports. Did you feel like you were paving the way, or is this just like, well, this is what I do and I'm good at it?
Well, I probably felt like I got a job, here to do a job, and I didn't think too much about it, but there were very few women, and there still are. It's still probably a very male-dominated profession. So I'm always happy to see more women.
yeah. And the Courier seemed to have a lot of women, and then there were other women photographers that came after you. But as you said, it's still very much a male dominated. And I have friends who cover, skating. That's my side thing, skating, who were a minority at the Olympics. So how does that, how did we change that? Or maybe do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, how do you change?
Any thoughts on that? Or how do we get more women into doing photojournalism?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm not sure the answer to that. I'm not sure the answer because journalism is taking a lot of hits these days in general. So, yeah.
But we do know that the photos are typically what draws the viewer or the reader in. And without that, the Catholic Courier wouldn't be as popular. Other agencies and publications wouldn't be able to sustain themselves. So without those photojournalists out there, so we honor you there. Let's talk a little bit more about the exhibit, because you mentioned the protests. And sometimes covering protests, it's a little unsettling going in because you don't know what you're going to get or if they're going to like you.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I don't remember that particular protest, but I have covered a lot of protests, and you have to be quick on your feet.
Well, this is the U of R and the shantytown, and you can see where they created their own tents and a whole little village, and you've got the iconic building, the library, right? I think that's the library in the back. And that kind of tells you where you're at immediately without knowing that it's even the U of R.
Yeah. Wow. And in that shanty town, I mean, it's this, what has changed? The kids are now protesting the Palestinians and building shanty towns again. It's like, that's great. Again, we're back to where we were, but glad they're out there.
Yeah. Because I'm looking at this image, and we had an image similar to that in the Courier just a couple months ago with the U of R, protesting the situation going on. So sometimes these images, though we're looking at them from the 80s, are repeating themselves.
Yeah, they are.
But they're iconic in the sense
Yeah.
of they tell the story of that moment, anti-apartheid, bit different than
Yeah.
the Palestinian quest, but still it's the human element that speaks to so many people because they either see themselves in there or against it, right? It's,
Yeah.
people are either drawn to it or revolted by it, but they're still looking at it. And that's
Yeah.
your role as a photojournalist, right?
Yes. And that one of the things that I've always liked throughout my career is photographing common people. People are always asking me, who's the most famous person you ever photographed? I never liked photographing famous people. It's very controlled. They always have a press agent. If it's the president, it's even more controlled. Because Secret Service, their PR people are controlling every second. But you get in with a normal person and it's a passport into their lives, into their situation. And if I could tell women who are interested in going into photography one thing, photography is a passport into somebody else's life, some other universe that you have not experienced. It will open your world. It will open your eyes to other people and other situations in this world. And there's nothing better, if you ask me. I would
Perfect advice.
I wouldn't trade my career for anything. I would say that.
Well, thank you, Bonnie, for joining us, and stay tuned to find out how you can see Bonnie's images and our other Courier photographers' images in our exhibit later in the show. Linda Dow Hayes was chief photographer of the Courier Journal from 1988 to 1989.
And then after she left the Courier Journal, she worked as a freelance photographer for other publications here in the Rochester area. She also opened up her own photography business, and then she still runs that today, along with being a busy worker at the Webster Central School District. Thank you so much for helping teach our children.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, we're focusing on the women of the Courier Journal / Catholic Courier. You were in the 80s and leading the way, and we have found out so much about the women that were basically, you were the only photographer and you had to help put the newspaper together. And a lot of times you say you put the newspaper to bed, but maybe some people don't always understand that. But maybe you describe what you were doing to help on those fronts.
Sure. Well, the responsibilities that I had during that time were photographing everything from services to meetings that maybe parishioners or some other people were in the parish were involved with, special events at different services, and sports, a lot of sports. And I think that's, my love of photographing sports really came through during that time. And I did photograph at another weekly newspaper in New Hampshire, which is where I'm from. And same type of thing, small towns. I would go out to all these different small towns and photograph sporting events, and in this case services, and meet with priests and people that were part of this big entity in the greater Rochester area. Then when it came time to put the newspaper together, I would work with the graphics department, and we would put the paper together. We would put it to bed, meaning get it ready for print so that it could go off to print. And that included everything from choosing, the images. I would work with a sports writer to choose the specific images that he wanted at that time. And we would discuss with the other writers maybe what images would show. But I'd also work with a graphics person to put the cut lines, which are the little descriptions underneath the photographs. He took care of the ads and all that section, but we would kind of work together to make it happen. And Karen France was right by our side, and everybody kind of just threw it all together, and made sure that it worked and everything was in it that needed to be in it.
And then it was sent off to the printer where the Democrat and Chronicle was printed, correct?
So I believe so. It's been quite a while since I've done 1988 is a long way away. But yes, I mean, I believe they were using the same printer. Yeah.
Now, how did you get into photography, and how did you end up at the Courier Journal since you weren't from Rochester originally?
No, not only that, I'm not Catholic either.
Okay.
So, I started photography from a very early age. I can remember to this day the first camera I ever had. It was just a little 110, I think it was. And I remember specifically climbing up the tree on our property in New Hampshire and taking pictures from a bird's eye view and all that kind of stuff. But through high school, I was part of putting the yearbook together and the school newspaper. In those days it was film. So developing the film and choosing the images and printing the pictures, and took a lot of sports stuff. My brother was involved in football, so I did that, and decided I wanted to go to college for photography. So I worked with the art department because at that time there was no photography program. And I put together a portfolio and I came to Rochester, looked at RIT as a potential college, looked at Ithaca and ended up at Ithaca College. So I did my 4 years there, and I specialized in what I hoped was fashion photography was what I really wanted to do. And instead I fell in love, and instead of going to New York City, I came to Rochester and started working as a newspaper person, but I really was freelance first. So I worked with studio photographers, did a little bit of work here and there for other things, just, one story at a time, if you will. And then I ended up getting a job in New Hampshire. So I was still in touch with people back in New Hampshire and found a job at a Concord item. And actually it was a beautiful setup because it was Concord, New Hampshire, which is the capital of New Hampshire. And it was 88 presidential campaign. So I actually was a small town little once a week newspaper photographer working with the big guys, and I was able to just make myself available to them, and I learned a whole lot from a lot of people during that time. Got married and came back to Rochester and settled in, and because I had just come from that, I was looking for a position in it. And honestly, photojournalism was my calling, more or less. Fashion photography would have been great, but it's very competitive. It's very difficult. In a big city like New York City, there's a lot of photographers out there fighting for those jobs. And some of my friends from college had those jobs, and they worked hard, and I kept in touch with them. Many of them are no longer doing that. So it's almost like I did a flip-flop. So I did this for a year here and a year in New Hampshire, then decided to stay home with my family for a while. But it was, I think I had either connected with the previous photographer, and I don't remember who was before me. I do remember talking with a gentleman who was a photographer, and I thought he was a photographer here. Again, 30 some odd years, a long time ago.
Yeah.
But we were talking about what this might entail. And I said, well, I'm a Protestant. I'm not sure how aware I am of the whole Catholic faith and the services and what to expect. But once I met with Karen Franz, we talked about, the different aspects. She saw my portfolio, and we decided it was a good fit.
Well, we're so glad that you fell in love with photography and fell in love with your husband, Todd, because Gina and I, when we worked together at Channel 10, worked with your husband and have become a family because of that. I know you've taken a lot of senior photos of family members, and so we appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about the exhibit. And it's just going to be this wonderful celebration of photography. Let's talk about the one picture that was selected from your portfolio.
Sure.
Can you describe it for us?
Sure. It was taking place during an Easter Vigil service in 1989, and as I was in during the service, as I was wandering around, kind of looking, it was the candlelight portion, and I was looking for someone that had the light from the candle in their face, and had kind of a look on their face. And I found this beautiful shot, or this beautiful little boy had this beatific, just beautiful little face staring up at the light. And I just thought that was a great shot, and we ran with it. And I'm delighted that you actually chose it, because when you contacted me, Gina, it was the shot that first popped into my head.
Oh,
Really?
Really. There were two shots that popped into my head about my memory, and again, it was a long time ago. But this was one of them, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see the candle in the background. You don't see the forefront, but where did that light come from?
So the light in his face is solely from that candle.
Oh, okay.
So photographically, and there is a little dot of light behind him, which is somebody else's candle. Photographically, and remember 1989, these are still film days.
Mhm.
So you did what was called pushing the film. So it was probably Tri-X 400, which is a Kodak film. And you just had to push it to be able to shoot. Now, nowadays in the digital world, I just purchased a camera, and you can get, and it was called 400 because that's the speed of the film. Nowadays, your digital sensor in your camera has certain speeds that it can shoot up to, and you can get up to as much as 50,000 ISO. Mm-hmm. So you can shoot in a dark room, and you can get this shot. So in those days, I had to do it in the dark room. So after I shot the way that I shot it, take it in the dark room, push it, and then when I printed it, made sure that I was doing the things that I wanted to it.
Do you miss those days?
I always laugh because I do, actually, I really do. I said when I got my first digital camera that I will never go back to film, and I don't think I will, although being in the hometown of George Eastman's beautiful museum, they offer a lot of great programs that harken back to, daguerreotypes, printing on glass and doing all these different things. I think maybe at some point I'd love to experience that. The chemicals were so brutal that my hands would basically shed like every 5-6 weeks. They were often stained a little brown sometimes, so it was pretty tough. When they talk about chemicals, the chemicals being toxic, and I was not in the room for too long. I would make sure that there was good ventilation there, but it was the same for the newspaper in New Hampshire. I was on my own, I was in a small little space, and my hands were in those chemicals a lot. So that part of it, no, I don't miss that.
Now, when you got into photography, we've been talking about women in photography. Did you see a lot of women doing photography at the time?
Well, when I was in college, there were quite a few women that were part of the program. When I came out of it, you would definitely run into women that were being studio assistants. And a few women I worked with owned their own studio. I worked as an internship when I was in college and was in New York City with a photographer, male, but he had 3 female assistants. So when I came to Rochester and was working here, certainly not in New Hampshire, I was not running into any female photographers. The daily newspaper in that city was all men. I was delighted to know that the Democrat and Chronicle had several female photographers, Tina Yee, the other woman escapes me, but I was delighted to see that, because as a woman, you want to see other women or other people of your kind out there doing what you love doing. So no, for the most part not, and especially with the sports photography, I never saw women, never. So, I've done a little bit of research in that women professional photographers make up half the field, which is an odd statistic because that's not what you see out there.
Right.
And I believe the reason, and in my research I'm seeing a lot of these numbers, is that brands like Kodak, like Nikon, Sony, Canon, they have ambassador programs. And ambassador programs mean they go out, the photographers, and they talk about that particular product, whoever they're ambassador for, and they'll do talks on different subject matters, and Nikon will be their sponsor, or whatever. The majority of ambassadors are men, okay? So if all you see is men out there touting Nikon, Sony, Canon, then you, as a woman, are thinking, okay, well, women don't really do this. You know, and it's not only gender, it's ethnicity. We are not seeing bigger numbers of women of color being part of this field because they're not seeing themselves out there in the world. So, you know, like anything, we hope that those numbers will change as time goes on because women offer a wonderful perspective as, you know, photographers for different stories. You know, it's something that a male counterpart may not be able to touch base on.
We've heard that a little bit too. The eye is different, the sensitivity is different, and we're not trying to, you know, feminize anything, but really you're looking for a special shot and you've got an idea in your head. It's going to be different than perhaps what a man would be seeing in the same, you know, event. What do you think the prospect for future photographers, videographers, photojournalism, it's really kind of all coming together now because we call them one-man bands. You got to do it all. You got to cover the story and shoot the video or the photos.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting, this journey that it's been on, and in a way, disappointing and discouraging. I have not had the opportunity to talk with any young people other than maybe high school students that I'm around. And I certainly encourage anybody that somebody points out to me that's interested in photography to get involved in photography. As far as newspapers are concerned, it's just kind of scary where that's headed. But there's evolution. There's room for evolution, just like the Catholic Courier has done. You know, and the Democrat and Chronicle here in Rochester has downsized. They have required that their photographers also learn how to shoot the video. Fortunately, a lot of the digital cameras that are coming out have those capabilities of being able to shoot video. And so you gotta change with the times. You've got to change with the times. And so for any media outlet to survive, they've got to embrace that. For any future photographers that are coming along, our world is very interested in pictures and will always, look at the success of Instagram, will always be interested in visuals, whether it's video, whether it is still photography. And I don't think that will ever die. There's just no way. We are visual creatures. And so the need for that is there. It's just a matter of what it's going to look like. You know, certainly digital is where we're headed. As far as video versus still, there's a need for both.
We want to thank Linda for joining us today. Stay tuned for later in the show on how you can see Linda's photo and other Courier photographers' photos in an exhibit this October. Tamara Long García was a staff photographer and social media coordinator at the Catholic Courier from 2005 to 2013. 2005 was also the start of El Mensajero Católico newspaper.
Well, after she left Catholic Courier and El Mensajero, Tamara worked in Catholic schools in Mesa, Arizona. And then in 2017, she started working as a multimedia editor for the Angelus. That's the newspaper for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So very similar to the Catholic Courier here in Rochester. So let's start off, Tamara. Welcome. And tell us how you got into photography and why you love it so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. Well, I was born and raised in Rochester, and my mother worked at Kodak her whole career. So I sort of grew up in a Kodak environment, and I was always really fascinated with, just pictures and the art of it, and the history of our city and how it relates. George Eastman frequented the museum often. Always just really enjoyed it. And then when it was time to graduate high school and apply for college, I sort of had like a one-track goal of I just want to be a wife, like get married and have kids. Like that's what I want to do with my life. And my mom was like, well, that's great, but you actually have to have like a plan B because you're not getting married like, the day after graduation. So, you got to do something with yourself until you meet the right guy and so on and so forth. So I sort of applied as sort of like, because I had to. But fortunately, RIT is one of the best photo schools in the country, and it was here in town. And so I applied and I got in, and I got my photojournalism degree there. And it sort of just really took off then, so more from a hobby to like professional photography, where I actually learned how to make pictures and, really like apply a lot of those, techniques to photography rather than just taking pictures, because I loved it as a hobby.
But isn't that great that you took something you loved and turned it into a career, which is that's what the ultimate goal should be for all of us, right? But how did you end up at the Catholic Courier and the El Mensajero?
Well, while I was still at RIT, there was an internship made available. I don't know if it was one that had just been publicly posted. I believe my professor told me about it. Maybe she had been reached out to by Mike Krupe at the Catholic Courier. He was the photo editor at the time. And so that just an internship became available, and I was interested in it, obviously. She knew I was Catholic. And so she thought it would be a perfect fit. And I interviewed with Mike and got that internship. And then the internship turned into like a part-time staff job. And then I sort of added more duties after that through the years. But yeah, I was through an internship at RIT.
Now, when you came to the Catholic Courier, El Mensajero kind of started. Talk a little bit about the things you covered for the Courier and then some of the things you covered for El Mensajero, because it was kind of different. It wasn't the same sort of things you were covering for both papers.
Right. Well, as the intern, stereotypically, you get sort of the assignments that nobody else wants. And so I did a lot of that, a lot of stuff, like very like local church stuff, like, bake sales or like a school play or, sometimes the same things that would happen every year that sort of got a little monotonous to cover. But it was all new to me, so I thought it was really fun. And it was also like a really good chance to practice and get used to taking pictures in different situations in really low light, because churches are obviously not very well lit. And just sort of expand like the skills that I had learned, like apply them, in the field. So I did a lot of stuff, a lot of nights and weekends stuff, because Mike did a lot of the office work, the day job stuff. And he had a wife and kids. So I did a lot of the nights and weekends stuff that, I was able to do. So
Did you
for El Mensajero, the assignments were a lot more cultural based, which was in retrospect really beneficial for me, because I am Puerto Rican and I grew up very Americanized. So I don't speak Spanish, but I was very familiar with like all of the different traditions and special masses and even the language. I can understand Spanish pretty well. So for me, it kind of felt very much like coming back home culturally. I sort of reconnected with those sort of roots and learning a lot about, all the different sort of Marian devotions and just really connecting with that community that I had sort of been separated from as I grew up. But it was really nice to reconnect culturally, especially within the church, to those through the El Mensajero assignments.
Oh, that's great. While you were at the Catholic Courier, I understand you went to Mexico. So you want to talk about that trip for us?
Sure. Well, that trip was life-changing, to say the least. I learned a lot about myself personally and professionally. It sort of was my transition from sort of that intern mentality to I can actually sort of do this on my own. I am, a grown-up professional. It was my first time traveling outside of the country. And I was going by myself. I was very nervous about it. It was at the height of sort of the drug cartel, very dangerous for tourists to go to Mexico sort of thing, which is why they arranged the trip, right? They were trying to boost tourism back to Mexico. And they would offer through the Catholic Press Association, they would offer press junket trips to different places to sort of help boost tourism there. And obviously Mexico is a very popular pilgrimage destination for Catholics. And I was able to go. Mike had already been before, and his wife was also due the week of the trip. So he needed to be home for the baby. So it's sort of like all the sort of pieces fit together for me to be able to go. And it was wonderful. I've never, well, I hadn't ever been anywhere, but it was amazing to see how central the churches are and the faith is in like secular everyday life there. I guess there isn't a difference between secular and faith life there, but it was amazing. All the cathedrals are just open to the public, and they're in the center of each town. And like it seems like all the other life in the city happens with the church at the center, which was very different for me to sort of process. And then I was amongst all these other editors from across the country who were also on the trip, and I was the only photographer. So they were asking me all these questions about how to take pictures and sort of giving them tips and stuff. And in turn, I was getting a lot of tips from them on how to, sort of put together the story when I got back. And it was really eye-opening and amazing. And I also, it just so happened to meet my now husband on that trip. He was an editor from the paper in the Diocese of Phoenix, where I live right now. And that's how we initially met, was on that random trip to Mexico.
Life-changing for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You got to go to the Our Lady of Guadalupe shrine while you were in Mexico, and we have this photo that's going to be in the exhibit that you took. And this young girl, do you remember this photo, or do you remember your time being at the Our Lady of Guadalupe shrine?
Yeah, so I actually don't remember specifically taking that picture, but I do remember being at the shrine very vividly. And I do remember there's like a sort of a very long walkway to get there, like from wherever you can park and get dropped off. And I remember as we were approaching the shrine, there was like this very, very, very long line of families, like people, but they all had children that were like dressed in white. And our tour guide told us that this was the very long line for baptisms at the shrine, at the cathedral. And I just thought that was fascinating that it was, I mean, I don't remember what day of the week it was, but they would just have these like almost like public times that you can go and get your child baptized. And there were children of all ages. But that little girl in the picture was just one of the little girls waiting in line with her family to get baptized there at the cathedral. And then, of course, we get to the cathedral, and it's wonderful. There, I believe there was a mass going on. There always seems to be a mass going on, but you're still able to go into sort of the line to go see the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that was also like life-changing in a sort of spiritual sense for me. I actually was not that familiar with Our Lady of Guadalupe, and obviously learning all about her and then sort of reflecting on the trip as a whole, and how life-changing it was and how meaningful it was. I, to this day, like really sort of have my own personal devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe for all these wonderful gifts that she's put in my life. So yes, that was obviously the peak of that trip for me, for sure.
So you mentioned that you were the only photographer in that group when you met your future husband. So I'm assuming there weren't too many females in that group. We are talking about women photographers, in your role as you've grown throughout the years and have participated in more of these junkets and shooting. Do you see a lot of women photographers? Do you feel like you were paving the way for others as a young student of photography? Describe to us about your career path.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I definitely, there was a lot of sort of the historical photographers that I learned about in school and sort of look up to their work did generally tend to be men. Um, and I was the only, there was a lot of women that worked at the Courier, still are, I believe. And so it was nice to work with women. But in terms of women photographers, there was a few at the Democrat and Chronicle newspaper that were shooting there at the time that I was familiar with, that I followed their work. Within diocesan photography, like for diocesan publications, I wasn't that familiar with that many women. I don't think that I paved the way for anyone or anything, but as the years have gone on and I've sort of worked in the Catholic press longer and longer, there have been many, many more. And today, I mean, I know several women photographers that are doing really amazing work for the diocesan publications. I think it definitely brings a different sort of lens to the work, that women certainly do approach a certain assignments differently than men. And I think it's important to have like both perspectives always. But, I think just in terms of like, more tender stories, definitely like I remember just having sort of the best times at Catholic schools, taking pictures of the kids there, and just of families. I think, it's always nice to have a different perspective for sure. So I'm glad to see there are more women photographers today, than there were when I first started.
Now, you continue to work in Catholic media.
Mhm.
Was it something that you always were thinking about? Did you think you would still be doing Catholic media once you started here at the Courier?
No, I didn't think that I would stay within sort of Catholic media. I am very grateful that I have, because it is the best of both worlds, getting to, do what you love and be able to work for the church at the same time. And I feel like there is, it's a lot different of things to cover, but I think it's been really a big blessing for me to be able to work in the Catholic media. I have sort of switched careers a couple times along the way. When I first moved here to Arizona, I needed to do something different. And Catholic schools sort of had an opportunity there, and that was wonderful. And then, of course, getting always freelancing whenever I could. And then getting back into it in more of like a sort of multimedia role, a lot of website maintenance and, social media and things like that. So it sort of has evolved over the years, but always been just wonderful to be able to work for the church and do sort of what I know and what I love at the same time.
Well, we thank you, Tamara, for joining us today and talking about your experience at the Catholic Courier in El Mensajero. You can see Bonnie, Linda, and Tamara's photos in an exhibit this October. For more information, visit our website, catholiccourier.com/lensoffaith.